Today, let's talk about a real unsolved mystery, the Khamar Daban Incident. This is a video taken by the rescue team at that time. They found 6 victims, 3 of whom were only wearing thin underwear, and 2 were barefoot, as if they were trying to evade something. There was one survivor of this incident, but she disappeared from the public eye after being rescued. It wasn't until 2019 that this survivor suddenly appeared on a television program sharing the terrifying details of what happened back then. Let's go back to 1993, when a group of young people was about to embark on an adventure on the southern shore of Lake Baikal. It was a team of 3 men, 3 women, and their female teacher, Korovina, who was 41 years old that year. She was an experienced hiker and had been awarded the title of Master of Sports by the Soviet Union. Korovina chose a route with a difficulty rating of 3, a total length of over 230 kilometers, and circumvented part of the Khamar Daban range. She had been preparing for this route for 6 months and was very familiar with the conditions in the mountains. So, on August 2nd, the team set off. At the same time, Korovina's 16-year-old daughter also led another team. This second team chose a route with a difficulty rating of 4, which meant crossing the heart of Khamar Daban. Korovina and her daughter agreed to meet at Lake Pato in the mountains and continue their journey together. Before entering the mountains, Korovina checked the weather forecast as a habit, and everything seemed fine for the next 7 days. However, shortly after they entered the mountains, they realized that the weather forecast was wrong as drizzling rain began to fall. The team had to put on rain ponchos and continue in the rain. But this wasn't a significant problem at the time, since each of them had a set of dry clothes carefully packed in waterproof bags in their backpacks. If continuous rain caused a drop in temperature, they could take out these dry clothes to keep warm. So, the team continued walking in the rain for 2 days. On August 4th, they crossed the Langute Pass and started climbing Mount Khan Ula, which stands at an altitude of 2,371 meters. They needed to traverse along the ridge of the mountain. Before noon, the team had climbed above 2,000 meters, and at this altitude, the forest disappeared, and they were on a high alpine meadow. Although the scenery was beautiful, the rain intensified, and thunderstorms began. Heavy raindrops pelted the team, and they had to move on in the thunderstorm. Their plan was to quickly traverse the ridge during the storm and reach the other side, but the muddy terrain and strong winds slowed them down. By 4 p.m., the team had reached an elevation of 2,310 meters, which was almost the summit of Mount Khan Ula. Just a little more, and they would have been able to descend and re-enter the forest, where they could find shelter from both the rain and the wind. Although the temperature was still around 10 degrees Celsius, the strong wind at the summit and their wet clothes were rapidly sapping their body heat. The team's perceived temperature was much lower than 10 degrees. After walking 6 more kilometers from the 2,310-meter point, darkness fell. At this point, Korovina decided they should set up camp on the mountain to spend the night. Fortunately, it was summer, and the temperature wasn't too low. They thought that if they endured the night, they could descend the next morning. However, at 4 a.m., a fierce wind tore their tent, allowing rainwater to flood in. By 6 a.m., the wind stopped, but everyone's sleeping bags were wet, and some team members began to vomit. After a simple breakfast, they repacked their gear. At 10 a.m. on August 5th, the team began their descent. It was at this point that snowflakes started to fall. The male members began to complain, saying they were wet, cold, and couldn't find any landmarks. The 3 male members were Alexander, 23 years old, a student at Moscow State Technical University and an experienced hiker. He had been part of hiking groups since he was 12 and was the strongest member of the team. He was also the son of Korovina's friend and had recently proposed to Korovina's daughter. Korovina even considered him like a son. Dennis, 19 years old, had initially not been on the team roster, but he replaced someone who couldn't join the trip. His parents were on vacation at the time, and Denny left a note saying he was going hiking and would return soon. Timur, 15 years old, grew up in a family of mountaineers and was an enthusiastic member of the hiking group. The three female members were Tatiana, 24 years old, who had just graduated and worked as a secretary at a pedagogical university. She loved hiking. Victoria, 16 years old, had been rejected by Korovina for a previous hiking trip because she had a breakdown due to exhaustion. However, she desperately wanted to be part of this Khamar Daban expedition, so she persuaded her mother to call Korovina and promised not to have a breakdown again. The last female member was Valentina, 17 years old, a student at Pavlov Pedagogical University in Kazakhstan, studying tourism and sports. She aspired to become a hiking instructor like Korovina. Everyone in this team was experienced in hiking. So even after enduring 3 days of heavy rain, they believed that they would be fine if they followed their plan and descended as intended. Little did they know that death would come unexpectedly amidst the complaints of the male members. Alexander, the strongest member of the team, accidentally fell, and even after being helped up, he continued to stumble. Korovina noticed something was wrong and decided to stay behind to take care of him, while the other team members continued to move ahead. However, not long after, they all rushed back because they heard Korovina calling for help. Alexander had started foaming at the mouth and experiencing convulsions. Korovina desperately needed assistance. Tatiana set up a makeshift shelter, and the others helped. Valentina and Korovina attended to Alexander, but they watched in horror as Alexander began to bleed from his nose, and his eyes widened with fear. His eyes started bleeding, his pupils dilated, and his face turned pale. Valentina felt his body temperature dropping. After checking, Korovina confirmed that Alexander had no pulse. None of them expected death to come so suddenly. It had only been a matter of minutes. However, to their shock, Victoria, who had been considered frail, also collapsed on the grass. Korovina instructed Valentina to help her to the shelter, but as Valentina tried to do so, the terrified Victoria turned aggressive and bit Valentina's arm. Valentina, frightened and seeking help, realized that Korovina was on the other side, where Tatiana was banging her head against a rock. Dennis had hidden behind a rock and was trying to crawl into his sleeping bag, seemingly as if everyone had been scared by something. Valentina left Victoria behind and ran to check. She found that Korovina, like Alexander, was foaming at the mouth, bleeding from every orifice, and had no pulse. Valentina pushed Timur beside them, but he had already stopped moving. At that moment, Valentina, terrified and shocked, was suddenly kicked by Denise, who shouted for her to go down the mountain. It was very windy, and Valentina practically clung to her backpack and was blown down the mountain. At first, Denise seemed to follow her, but Valentina eventually didn't see him coming down. Once she entered the forest, Valentina was filled with fear. In an instant, all her companions had fallen, and she wondered if she would meet the same fate. Valentina changed into dry clothes, covered herself with a sunshade, and hid in her sleeping bag. That's how she spent August 5th in fear. The next morning, she climbed up the mountain to check. Everyone remained in the same positions as the day before, none of them alive. All were foaming at the mouth. Valentina thought they had all died of pulmonary edema, but she didn't dare dwell on it. She collected a compass and a map from her teammates and descended alone to seek help. She spent 4 days and nights alone in the mountains, descending along the path on the map until she reached the Snezhnaya River. However, she still couldn't find any signs of civilization. At this point, Valentina had started running a high fever, and her lungs showed signs of edema. She was coughing continuously, experiencing difficulty breathing, and her consciousness was gradually fading. She didn't want to die all dirty and muddy, so she mustered the strength to crawl into the icy river, planning to clean herself from head to toe before facing death. At that moment, she suddenly saw a noticeable double kayak at a bend in the river. Valentina screamed and waved her arms. It turned out to be a pair of tourists from Kyiv, Ukraine, who rescued Valentina. At the same time, on August 5th, Korovina's daughter's team had safely reached their rendezvous point and waited for 2 days, but didn't see any sign of Korovina's team emerging from the forest. So, she decided to lead her team away. On August 18th, Korovina's daughter reached her destination, Sludyanka, and immediately reported the incident to rescue authorities. However, due to weather conditions, a rescue helicopter didn't take off until the 21st, and the rescue team didn't reach the site until the 24th. At this point, it had been 20 days since the mountain tragedy on August 5th. Shortly after, forensic experts concluded that, except for Korovina, who died of a sudden heart attack, the other 5 individuals died of hypothermia, commonly known as freezing to death. Additionally, they found signs of malnutrition in the victims. Their livers and muscles lacked glycogen, and several organs were malnourished. Why did this happen? At the time, there were several theories to explain it. After the incident, Yuri E. Golias, the deputy director of the local search and rescue agency, was interviewed, and he stated that he had known Korovina for a long time. He recalled a time when he met Korovina near the northern shore of Lake Baikal. She was with 2 16- or 17-year-old boys who appeared extremely exhausted. One of them couldn't even lift a machete. Yuri led the boys into his tent and gave them tea and bread. The boys attacked the food as if they hadn't eaten for days. Yuri remembered that Korovina told him she intended to start a survival school, where students would go into the mountains with minimal clothing and food to toughen their willpower and build character. Yuri was angry when he heard this, as the boys were just teenagers. During the search and rescue operation, Yuri noticed a similar situation. They meticulously searched the camp, but found only an empty can of meat. Yuri said, "Imagine this, it's freezing and raining on the mountaintop, and Korovina ordered the 1 can of stew to be divided into 7 portions. Yuri speculated that the team members only had a small amount to eat in those harsh conditions, which could explain their malnutrition. Yuri's explanation seemed to align with the official cause of death. However, considering that the search and rescue team found only 1 empty can on the scene, it didn't necessarily mean that the team had only eaten 1 can for breakfast. By the time the search and rescue team arrived, 20 days had passed, so it was entirely possible that any other food remnants had been carried away by animals or blown away by the wind. At the time, the media intended to interview the surviving team member Valentina about the team's food situation, but Valentina had seemingly disappeared, and no one knew where she had gone after being rescued. When the rescue team found the 6 victims, 3 of them had torn their outer clothing and were only wearing thin underwear, and 2 were barefoot, appearing as if they were trying to escape something. This phenomenon appeared very unusual to the public and the media, leading to questions. At this point, mountain experts stepped in and explained that this seemingly abnormal behavior was actually consistent with the symptoms of hypothermia, known as paradoxical undressing. This occurs when, with the body's temperature dropping below 32 degrees, the brain's temperature regulation center in the hypothalamus becomes confused and signals the body to feel excessively hot. Under the guidance of this incorrect signal, the team members began to undress uncontrollably. This paradoxical undressing phenomenon has been observed in other mountain tragedies and is not uncommon. While the experts' explanations seemed plausible, it was different this time. One member of the rescue team had questioned the expert's explanation, stating that known cases of paradoxical undressing occurred in winter, and this phenomenon was not common. There had been no previous instances of 5 people simultaneously dying of hypothermia, all exhibiting paradoxical undressing. Furthermore, the team's demise occurred in the summer, and their experienced team should not have succumbed to freezing, even after being drenched by rain for several days. In such conditions, it would only take them 20 minutes to start a fire. So why didn't they do so? Also, why did they choose to spend the night on the mountain? Even if they were too tired to continue, they could have reached a shelter camp just 30 minutes away, marked on their map. Additionally, each person had dry sweaters in their backpacks, which showed no signs of being used. Clearly, they weren't feeling very cold. The team did not believe that spending the night on the mountain would necessarily lead to freezing deaths. The facts of the case did not align with the theory of hypothermia. Breakfast traces were found at the scene, and the team perished after having breakfast the next day, which did not match the symptoms of hypothermia. Could it have been due to something in their breakfast the following day? Survivor Valentina mentioned that the team had been collecting a rare plant called Rhodiola crenulata, also known as golden root, as Korovina's request. The rescue team found a large quantity of Rhodiola crenulata in the victims' backpacks. According to Valentina, their delay on the mountain was due to the group's focus on collecting this plant. Could it be possible that some poisonous mushrooms were mistakenly gathered along with the Rhodiola crenulata during the collection? Then, when they cooked the golden root for breakfast the next day, these toxic mushrooms were accidentally included, leading to a collective poisoning. This would align with the survivors' accounts of hitting their heads on rocks and behaving erratically. However, this theory also appears to be flawed. Firstly, Korovina herself was an herbalist, and it's highly unlikely she would have allowed the team to consume poisonous mushrooms. Additionally, Valentina ate the same breakfast and did not get poisoned. This theory was proposed by a member of the rescue team. He believed that the large quantity of golden root found in Korovina's team's backpacks might have been intended for sale after they descended the mountain. This behavior would have offended the local beliefs of the Buryat people, a Mongolian group in the area who practice Tibetan Buddhism and shamanism. They consider Rhodiola crenulata a sacred plant that should not be excessively harvested. The Khamar Daban, where they were, was originally known in the local Mongolian language as a terrible stone. In ancient times, this area was a sacrificial altar, and it was believed that the souls of the deceased would remain there forever. The locals held the mountain in reverence and were cautious about picking the Rhodiola crenulata from it. However, Korovina's team harvested it extensively, which caused the delay in descending the mountain. According to survivors, the rain suddenly turned into a thunderstorm while they were on the mountain. In the local Mongolian belief system, this might be seen as a curse from a shaman. A member of the rescue team proposed that the location where the team set up camp was problematic in terms of topography. It was situated in a narrow valley, and the strong winds throughout the night may have generated infrasound in the valley, which, though inaudible, can be harmful to the human body. Meanwhile, the thunderstorm at the time may have produced a significant amount of ozone in front of the valley, with the highest concentration occurring in the morning. Ozone poisoning can also lead to neurological disturbances. The team likely encountered infrasound and ozone poisoning. While this theory is plausible, it's challenging to confirm objectively. Furthermore, it doesn't explain why survivor Valentina was not affected. This is an urban legend that many enthusiasts are passionate about, mainly because, according to Valentina's description, the victims exhibited symptoms such as frothing at the mouth, convulsions, and bleeding from the eyes and nose. This is reminiscent of poisoning from a Soviet-era nerve agent, including the cause of Korovina's sudden cardiac arrest, which aligns with the side effects of such nerve toxins. The nerve agent in question is called Novichok, which the Soviet Union developed in 1971 and coincidentally discontinued in 1993. Enthusiasts believe that there is evidence to suggest that the final experiments with this toxin took place in the Khamar Daban Mountains just before its discontinuation, implying that Korovina's team might have accidentally stumbled into a test area. However, this theory has some inconsistencies. Khamar Daban is not an uninhabited area, especially in August, which is the peak of the tourist season. The military wouldn't choose this time and place for experiments. Additionally, it doesn't explain why Valentina was unaffected. But enthusiasts later found a clue. This toxin is water-soluble and takes at least 4 months to completely degrade in a natural environment. This means that the military's experiments could have taken place on the mountain a few months prior, with the heavy rain washing the remaining toxins to the team's campsite the night before. The next day, when the sun came out, the toxins would have evaporated, leading to the team's collective poisoning as the toxins were released from the grass. This would explain why Alexander was the first to be affected. He might have come into contact with a high concentration of the toxin from the grass while he fell. Subsequently, the team members who bent down to help Alexander also got poisoned. As for Valentina not getting poisoned, it might be because she was separated from the ground while continuously moving during the process of collective poisoning. This would suggest that she was less exposed to the toxin. Similarly, not deeply poisoned was Denny initially. However, he went behind a rock and climbed into his sleeping bag later, which quickly led to his poisoning. By the time he and Valentina descended the mountain, they were already too poisoned to keep up. This speculation raises two additional aspects. First, why did Valentina disappear after being rescued? Had she made a confidentiality agreement with a security agency? Second, they reported the incident on August 18th. But why did the helicopter not take off until the 21st and the rescue team only arrive on the 24th? Was the 7-day delay caused by someone waiting for the toxins to dissipate intentionally? This theory appears to lack any objective evidence and is often considered an urban legend. However, after waiting for 26 years, in 2019, when survivors Valentina and Korovina's daughter appeared on television, they shared an even stranger story. In 2019, after listening to Valentina's account of the events, investigative journalists saw her stand up and retrieve an old rosary from her wardrobe. Valentina stated that this rosary was given to her by a local rescue worker after she was rescued in Sludyanka, and it was only when she received this rosary that she truly felt saved. She believed it signified a reconciliation between humans and nature. Valentina also stated that Korovina was not a cruel person. Their team's daily meals were precisely calculated, and no one in the team bore ill will towards her. Before setting up camp on the mountain, they attempted to light a campfire, but failed, which forced them to spend the night in the cold, with their tent ripped and sleeping bags soaked. Korovina's daughter then mentioned in the interview that before the team set off, locals had warned them that the mountains were behaving unusually that year. There was a bear roaring and striking the railroad, even attempting to stop an oncoming train. After entering the mountains, Korovina's daughter repeatedly saw a giant elk watching them along the way. They even detoured around the animal, delaying them by half a day as they skirted the edge of the forest. As it turned out, when the team reached the valley, they found it littered with trees that had been toppled by a recent mudslide. Had they not taken the detour, they could have encountered the mudslide. Korovina's daughter later had recurring dreams of the giant elk, believing that it had saved them. Unexpectedly, 26 years later, when the two key figures spoke out for the first time, they shared such a peculiar story. As of now, the Khamar Daban incident remains an unsolved mystery. Perhaps the stories told by Valentina and Korovina's daughter aren't strange at all, but rather their way of expressing the mountain's divine significance in a manner unfamiliar to Westerners.